In this post, I'd like to turn to the second reason why I believe Christians ought to love Darwin and the Big Bang, and that is the implications it has for the reality of the Garden of Eden. From the time the Bible was first compiled in the early 4th century AD until the 18th century, pretty much anyone who believed in the Bible also believed that the account of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden really did happen. Christians, Jews, and Muslims, all believers in the Garden of Eden, had no reason to suggest otherwise. Since that time, the reality of the garden has come into question. This is particularly true when one considers some of the more recent scientific data that appear to contradict the idea that a single pair of humans named Adam and Eve were the first to inhabit the earth, and all humans are descendants of the original pair. Let's take a look at some of the evidence that's out there. First, let's consider the evidence found by paleontologists such as Darrell Domning from Howard University in Washington. Domning and others have found considerable evidence that non-human mammals display the very same type of bad behavior that we call sin in humans. For example, chimpanzees are known to steal and deceive. If Adam and Eve committed the original sin and passed it along to their descendants, how can one explain sinful behavior in non-human primates? Surely nobody's suggesting that Adam and Eve were the parents of non-human mammals. Second, in recent years, genetic evidence has been found that traces humans back to an original man and a woman. The man has been referred to as chromosomal Adam and the woman as mitochondrial Eve. Unfortunately, there's also evidence that these individuals did not live either at the same time or close to the same place, thus undercutting the idea that this is evidence of a real Garden of Eden. Third is the evidence of Francisco Ayala, an evolutionary biologist from the University of California, Irvine. Ayala has identified what is called the DRB1 gene. It's one that's found not only in humans, but in our genetic near cousins such as the chimpanzee and the gorilla. Ayala's research shows that all of these mammals appear to have a single common ancestor about 60 million years ago. At various points along the way, different groups split off. The reason Ayala's research is important is that it shows that at no point in time could there have been only two humans. In fact, according to Ayala, at no point could there have been fewer than 16 humans. But more likely, the minimum number of humans was probably 5,000 to 100,000. This suggests there never could have been just an Adam and Eve. Finally, and somewhat surprising to many, even the book of Genesis in the Bible seems to call into question the idea that there were just two humans. If there were just two humans, then were Adam and Eve not only the parents of Cain, but also of his wife? If so, that would imply an incestuous relationship. Really? Genesis also has other references that suggest there were other humans present besides Adam and Eve. Thus, just relying on the Bible, it isn't unreasonable to conclude that the original cohort of humans had more than two people. Many have taken the scientific arguments presented above to mean that Adam and Eve could not have been real people. But for many evangelical Christians, making Adam and Eve allegorical seriously undercuts the Christian message. If the price of Darwin and other modern science is an allegorical Garden of Eden, many of these Christians say they'll take the Garden of Eden and reject Darwin. My proposed theory presents a solution to this problem. Assume for a moment that both Darwin and Francisco Ayala are correct. That would mean that humans did descend from precursor species, and it would also mean that when humans first appeared on Earth, there were likely at least 5,000, maybe as many as 100,000. Even in this circumstance, I'd argue, there could easily have been a real-life Garden of Eden. Let me show you how. If you strip away some of the details, the Garden of Eden story includes the following core elements. First, two creatures called humans with mental capabilities never before seen in any living creature. Second, sufficient mental capacity to understand the difference between right and wrong. Third, the capacity to make conscious decisions. And fourth, the ability to make a bad choice even when the person knows that it is the wrong choice. That sounds exactly what one would expect when envisioning the evolution of mankind. We evolved larger brains that had the capacity to make choices, even bad ones. Let's look at each of these. First, Adam and Eve could easily have been two people selected by God for a test. They could have been two people amongst the original group of humans, so their actions could have been representative of all humans at that time. Darwin's theory posits that creatures would slowly evolve the capability for independent thought and judgment. Adam and Eve, therefore, could have been amongst the first two with that capability. Presumably, though, all or nearly all of the humans in this original cohort had evolved similar mental faculties. All would have gotten to the point that if they understand the difference between right and wrong, yet could make a bad decision. Thus, Adam and Eve's behavior would simply have served as a convenient proxy for the entire cohort of humans. Second, Darwin suggests that humans evolved higher mental faculties. Eventually, creatures would emerge with sufficient capability to understand the difference between right and wrong, as well as the capacity to make decisions. Third, according to the theory, creatures could eventually emerge who could think and act sufficiently independently that they would disregard what someone else wanted. That sounds exactly like what Adam and Eve did. Thus, even if you insist that the Garden of Eden didn't literally happen, that it was allegorical, it isn't hard to see the implication of Darwin's theory. Humans evolved to the point that they did possess consciousness, they did develop the capacity to understand the difference between right and wrong, and they did need to feel a sense of control. Sooner or later, some human would try to act in a defiant manner. There's one other element to the story we need to take care of, that we don't overlook. What we often forget is that God could have simply ignored Adam and Eve, then redirected his attention elsewhere in the universe. After all, current evidence suggests there are about 10 to the 22nd power stars in the universe. That's one with 22 zeros after it. That means there are at least 1 billion stars in the universe. Even if only a fraction of those have planets that have the potential for life, that still means there could be billions of other planets with some type of life on it. When all is said and done, in the universe, we humans are probably neither truly unique nor truly special. Given that, God could easily have said, I don't have time for these people, I'm out of here. But of course, Christians believe God made a different decision, one to be actively involved in our world after the sin of Adam and Eve. Now, I know I cannot prove this was the scenario. The important thing, however, is that Darwin's theory creates a very practical way for this to have been the actual scenario. Further, this scenario very neatly fits the actual description of Genesis 2 and 3. Thus, Darwin creates a way to have a literal Garden of Eden as well as an explanation for what really happened. In other words, Darwin offers a way for there to have been a real-life Garden of Eden, thus providing a second reason Christians ought to love Darwin's theory.